Welcome back to Questions for the Rector. I'm Stephen Heiner, and with us, as always, is the Rector of Most Holy Trinity Seminary here in Reading, Pennsylvania, His Excellency Bishop Donald Sanborn. Hello, Your Excellency.
Hello, Stephen.
Today, we're going to be talking about IVF, which is the short term for in vitro fertilization. I suppose we should start with asking what's the Church's teaching regarding conception and the marital act?
Pius XII was quite clear about it. He said that conception can only be done by a physical union of married people, in sexual intercourse. There's no other possible way in which you could accomplish that. He did say that anything that would enhance nature, in regard to that, would be acceptable, but that nothing that would be unnatural or outside of nature.
Now, why is that important, Your Excellency? Because some people might say, there are artificial limbs, people get prosthetics, so you can have artificial help of life functions. Why is that not the case when it comes to conception?
Well, it's a whole different thing. It's a union of mother and father. You see, so it's not merely your hand that is withered or something like that. It's a sacred union. It's a sacrament. It's even as a natural contract. It's something that pertains to the natural law, and the child must be raised in a family. They don't have offspring, just the way insects have offspring or something like that, and just reproduce. Even mammals have a certain family life. There's a certain upbringing, and human beings need a very, very prolonged upbringing, and they need more than animals. They need a moral upbringing, which is the most important, spiritual upbringing. And they need to be taught their catechism. They need to be taught moral virtues. They need to be taught mortification of their faults, etc. So it has to be within a family. So any sort of conception that is outside of the constituted family by matrimony is something that is mortally sinful.
And so this has come to people's attention because the president recently announced more funding for IVF, and his idea was we need to have more babies. And so we want more people to have access to this technology. And obviously, you've already pointed out that IVF is wrong. What about the people who work for the president, Your Excellency? Some people had said on social media when it was announced that any Catholic who's working for the president should step down, given that he's announcing this policy.
No, not unless they are required to cooperate in some way in that policy. But just to say President Trump believes in this is not cooperation. If they were to promote it somehow or in some way cooperate in that way, they could not. Either they would have to say no, or if he insisted, then they would step down. But the sin would be in cooperation, not merely taking note of the fact that that's his position. He also has an unacceptable position with regard to abortion. Abortion after no abortion up to after a certain amount of weeks. And but that's unacceptable. Abortion is absolutely immoral right from the moment of conception, and that conceived cell, you might say, the first cell of the child has a right, an absolute right before God, a God-given right to be brought to term, and nobody can interfere with that.
And if you want to learn a little bit more in detail, His Excellency and I spoke about this in a previous episode. We'll put a link to that in the description. Now, Your Excellency, the Church has talked, as you said, through Pius XII about natural means, and as you noted, the sacred union. One of the unfortunate effects of IVF is there's a creation of a number of fertilized embryos, which are then frozen, out of which only one is chosen usually to put impregnate. Obviously, the Church would not have conceived of having to rule on what would happen to these embryos. And if the embryos could be gestated in a natural manner, so let's say we had a technology in which the embryo could simply be put inside and the embryo could grow to full term, does that violate the idea of the sacred union? Obviously, that embryo has been put together by unnatural means.
Yes. No, it is to reduce human beings to animals.
Mm.
You could do that with animals because human beings have control over animals, God-given control over animals. So we can do all sorts of things with regard to
Right.
animals.
Cows are artificially inseminated all
Yes,
the time.
yes. You see, so because we have control over them, but God has control over us. And so we are totally submitted to the laws of God concerning conception. A whole different thing is to conceive a child than to conceive a cow. A child is primarily the effect of God, not the effect of the human beings involved. And because he creates the immortal soul, which makes the child to be human. See, it is your immortal soul made in the image and likeness of God, which makes that child human. See, so he is the principal author of the child. You cannot in any way disturb the way in which God has willed that child to be conceived. That would be contrary to the law of God and unnatural, and anything that's against nature is always against God.
So going back to what you'd said, Yersley, about the child having an absolute right to be brought to term, is it because these children were conceived in an unnatural way that they do not partake of that right?
Well, to take an embryo and freeze it is to interrupt that right. In other words, you are,
In a stasis of sorts.
yes. I mean, it is something totally contrary to nature and against the law of God and also against the rights of the child that is conceived. And it's everything is wrong about it. You know, it is. Nature is very kind to us if we follow it. But if we do not, it is very unkind to us. You see, so and more so, the law of God must be observed in all things, and the law of nature is always the law of God. It's as simple as that. There's really no other way around it, you might say.
So in one sense, in a purely natural way, when the president says this is, for more babies, it's true, but these are all souls that are condemned to limbo effectively. They have no way to
Oh
come to
yes,
term. And
yes, it's barbaric, and yes, it's a good end that we have more babies, but every good end it must be achieved by a good means. That's a general moral principle that you can't use an evil means to attain a good end.
can you explain that a bit more for Yerxley, for people who might not be familiar with that?
Well, that the end doesn't justify the means. That's it means that you could want to alleviate the sufferings of the poor, so you go rob a bank. You see, that would be an evil means for a good end, and so that ruins the whole thing. You see, so you can't alleviate their poverty by means of robbing a bank. And the same is true of anything in life. You cannot use an evil means for a good end.
And that's a larger situation. You're actually robbing a bank, but people will think of the classic, I need to get a loaf of bread to feed my family. I'm going to stop by the bakery. And
Well, the general moral principle is that if you are starving, you may take something that doesn't belong to you.
why is that, Your Excellency?
Because as St. Thomas says, all of the goods of the earth pertain ultimately to everyone. In other words, that they're not meant to be hoarded by this or that person. So if you are in extreme need, then it's not stealing. It is something that you have a right to because you're in extreme need. And so it's one of the goods of the earth and you need it extremely.
Some people might be surprised to hear that, Your Excellency. I think it's just moral teaching that isn't passed down properly.
St. Thomas Aquinas, whose feast we celebrate today. No, and it's the general moral teaching of the Catholic Church. No, it's but that's a very rare case, especially today.
Right.
But you could see maybe in the Middle Ages somebody running up to a basket of apples and taking some apples because his family is starving. You could see that, I mean, and I don't think in the Middle Ages anyone would have begrudged it to him.
I think if Catholics are out there having this conversation with people in the workplace or people who they might know, the Catholic position may seem a very, very harsh position to them. That not only are these older couples not being permitted another way, but even the embryos that have been created as part of this process, they cannot be brought to term. How would you, what would you tell people to give more context for people who are objecting. This Catholic position is very harsh. This doesn't partake of the love of Christ. Whatever objections may be raised, how would you respond, or how would you
Well,
encourage
that
people to
there is no
respond?
exception to the natural law. The natural law, nature never changes, and either does the natural law change. God does not change. He created nature, it doesn't change. There's a law of nature. It doesn't change. And we all have to obey the law of nature. We cannot circumvent it, we cannot go against it. But we live in an age when natural law, the very notion of natural law, is repudiated. And that's why you have all sorts of unnatural things going on and people accepting it and feeling prideful about it, etc. See? No, that's just the world we live in. Abortion is against the natural law. Artificial birth control is against the natural law. All sorts of other things, sexual living together outside of marriage is against the natural law. I mean, this is
So you're noting it's not even a religious question, Your Excellency. You're just saying it's as opposed to the natural law.
it's natural law.
Well, and again, that might lead to further conversations in those circles. But I think I hope that our watchers and listeners have a better understanding now, not only of the church's teaching on IVF, but why this is the case, and how they might potentially make arguments to people around them who might question the church's teaching. Well, as always, Your Excellency, thank you for your time.
Not at all. Thank you.